You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 2nd of January 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. Coming up on today's programme...
So I know, while this person committed a terrible assault on the city, the spirit of our New Orleans will never be defeated.
We'll get the latest on the two attacks in the US, one in New Orleans and the other in Las Vegas. We'll be in Warsaw to discuss the rotating EU Council presidency, which Poland now holds for the next 6 months. Then, could another pandemic be on the way? We'll ask a virologist how worried we should be about bird flu. And Gunnar Grinlid is back from snowy Norway.
That's right, and I'll be giving you a snowy roundup of news from the Nordic region.
Thank you, Gunnar. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Georgina Godwin. We begin the show with the latest information on what the FBI is now calling an act of terrorism in the early hours of New Year's Day, when a driver sped into a crowd of revellers in New Orleans, killing at least 15 people and injuring at least 30 more. I'm joined now by Monocle's senior news editor, Chris Chermak. Chris, thanks for stepping in. How did this attack unfold?
Well, as you say, Georgina, it was quite an incredible, sad start to New Year's Day in New Orleans. It was at around 3:15 a.m. A driver in a rented truck, a Ford F-150, basically veered up on a curb past a police cruiser were attempting to block access to Bourbon Street, and veered into Bourbon Street, which is the main street, if you will, in New Orleans, which was, of course, filled with activity for New Year's Day. Clearly, from what authorities were saying, was just trying to, unfortunately, kill as many people as possible, then crashed, engaged in a shootout with police. He was armed, injured 2 police officers, and then was killed himself. It should also be said that other explosive devices were found at other parts of Bourbon Street and in the French Quarter, which points to the fact that authorities, at least for the moment, are saying that there may have been more than one person involved in this, although that is still unclear at this point. At least there's been no further clear details on what kind of other people might have been involved.
Just give us a sense of what Bourbon Street's like, because I know it's really busy at the best of times, but at New Year it must have been insane.
It's incredible. I mean, I've been to Bourbon Street, and it is really the loudest street I have ever visited, I think it's fair to say, Georgina, and that's at any time of the year. Then you have, of course, Mardi Gras is the absolute biggest celebration that you have in New Orleans, but, you know, like anywhere else, New Year's Day, New Year's Eve is not far behind. It is an incredibly boisterous street. You heard Joe Biden at the top of the show talking about kind of the spirit of New Orleans, and Bourbon Street is the heart of that spirit of New Orleans, with the amount of people that would have been there for this evening and just such a celebratory atmosphere. I think what's been striking, you know, when you listen to people, even in the aftermath of this attack, talking about just the spirit and that they love New Orleans. There is a love for this city. There is a love for Bourbon Street. It's such a boisterous and fun place.
So who is the attacker and what was his motive?
The attacker has been named as Shamsuddin Jabbar. He's a 42-year-old man. He is a U.S. citizen born in Texas. Army veteran, served in Afghanistan as well, married twice, worked in real estate. From some of the reporting we have so far, people are surprised by this. That said, in terms of a motive, the one thing we do know that's been reported is there was an Islamic State flag in his truck. There are some reports that he converted to Islam at some stage in adulthood, but otherwise there isn't really a clear connection yet that we know of to Islamic State, but clearly that is one of the motives that he had for this, and that's also why police and authorities are looking for other connections to Islamic State, other participants potentially in this, whether that is in Louisiana, in New Orleans, or also back in his home state of Texas.
So a few hours after this incident, a Tesla Cybertruck blew blew up outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. What are the details of that?
Yeah, it is pretty incredible to have these things happen on the same night, which of course has led some people to draw questions about whether they are connected or not. A Tesla Cybertruck was, as you said, exploded just outside of the Trump International Hotel in Vegas, or outside of the entrance. The driver was killed. 7 other people were lightly injured. There were apparently explosives and fireworks or improvised explosives in the truck. It is being investigated as a terrorist attack as well. Authorities are exploring whether there are links, but that said, even Joe Biden said none have been found so far, other than that they basically both, the rental car application Turo was used by both for this, but that said, it's not, not the same rental place or anything like that. So we don't really know at this point whether there is any direct link, but it's certainly something that is raising security concerns. Just in the last hour, we've also had New York's Mayor Eric Adams saying that he is stepping up security in New York, also outside of Donald Trump's tower and Times Square and other places as well. So it is something of a tense time until authorities can figure out exactly what is connected and what isn't right now.
And in terms of a political connection, I mean, here we have a Tesla owned by Elon Musk. We have a hotel owned by Donald Trump. That photograph of this Tesla on fire outside the hotel, which has Trump in huge letters, kind of seemed to be indicative of the year to come in some ways. Do you think somebody was trying to make a political point here?
I mean, we really don't know much yet about the motive in that case, so we don't know what kind of political point might be made, but certainly that image, yes, is quite a striking one. Elon Musk has been very involved in this. He's been commenting on the attack. Apparently he was also very involved in trying to help authorities trace back where the truck came from. It came from Colorado, but the authorities have not released the name of the person yet who they believe was responsible, or at least they know who rented this truck. They have not said any more than that. But of course, the symbolism is quite striking. We are entering the year of Donald Trump's inauguration. Trump himself has been perhaps, sadly, predictably outspoken so far, talking about the level of crime in the United States and that authorities have been basically unable to stop this event from happening. And he's been quite scathing in his criticism of that, promising that things will change once he becomes inaugurated on the 20th of January.
He also blamed it on a migrant, which of course is not true at all.
He did initially as well, exactly.
Now, there was a similar attack in Germany before the holidays, and there was violence over New Year as well. I mean, is this a global trend?
Yeah, again, it's hard to describe these things as connected, isn't it? But it is still striking that there was a similar attack with a car in Magdeburg in Germany. 5 people killed, 200 injured. In this case, it was a Saudi national who was actually anti-Islam and a far-right AfD supporter, at least from the reporting, who allegedly committed this crime in Magdeburg. Then separate from that, you just had over New Year's about 5 people killed in fireworks accidents, which is something that is always a bit of a strange aspect of Germany, that they allow private fireworks access for a few hours over New Year's. So this can be common, but worse than it has been in the past. And rioting in different cities. In Berlin, 400 people arrested, many using fireworks to attack the authorities, things like that. It is quite striking that this kind of incidents that have happened in Germany, I think it's leading a lot of people within Germany as well to question whether fireworks should be allowed and why there is this sort of unrest that happens a lot of New Year's, frankly, in Germany. So in that sense, it's maybe not connected with what happened in the US, but certainly not a great start to the year.
No, and of course this is something that often happens when alcohol at large levels is involved in the mix, which often is at New Year.
Alcohol and fireworks are not a good mix to put together, that's for sure.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. That was Monocle's senior news editor, Chris Chermak. Now, here's Anita Riotto with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Georgina. Israeli airstrikes today killed at least 10 Palestinians, including women and children, according to medics. The attack allegedly hit a tent encampment for displaced families in a designated humanitarian area. South Korean police have raided Jeju Air and the operator of Muwon International Airport's offices as they investigate the cause of this Sunday's plane crash. Audio from the cockpit has now been retrieved, according to the country's transport ministry. Taiwan's defense ministry says China has held its first combat patrol of the island in 2025. Taiwan's President Lei has reiterated his desire to hold talks with Beijing. Thanks, Georgina. Back to you.
Thanks, Anita. Poland has begun its 6-month presidency of the Council of the European Union, taking over from the controversial tenure of Hungary. It's the second time in Poland's history it's held this position, in which it's tasked with guiding the Council's work and representing all member states in negotiations with other EU institutions. Well, joining us now is Mateusz Mazzini, who's a writer at large at Gazeta Wyborcza and a lecturer in journalism at Collegium Civitas in Warsaw. Mateusz, lovely to have you back with us. Happy New Year to you. Firstly, how was the EU impacted by Hungary's presidency?
Thanks for having me, and Happy New Year to you and all of the listeners. So now back to the Polish presidency. It's going to be definitely a very much a change of tone in the way European Union, especially foreign policy and defense policy, will be conducted under the Polish leadership, because we all remember the past 6 months under the helm of Viktor Orban and Hungary were very controversial because they were marked, most importantly, I think, by lack of unity. We all remember Viktor Orban opening his period at the leadership of the European Council by going first to Kiev, then to Moscow, and then to Beijing, and ushering in, or trying to usher in, his own independent peace plan or peace negotiations without having consulted that previously with any of the major European politics figures. In that regard, I think this will be a very different presidency on behalf of Poland, because whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we can discuss that later. But Poland is actually trying to fill in a certain vacuum of power that has emerged recently in Europe, and many news outlets have been actually writing about that quite extensively over the last few weeks, that given the domestic troubles in Germany, the upcoming parliamentary elections in February, the chaos of French politics, we have that traditional Franco-German axis of leadership pretty much gone. And the big question that is emerging right now in European politics is who's going to fill that vacuum. Poland will definitely make an effort to do that, but whether it will have all the tools and all the manpower to do it, that's yet to be seen.
And because, of course, this comes at a critical moment for the country's domestic politics. It's just over a year after the ousting of the Law and Justice Party, and it's just before the presidential elections. Can you talk us through the changing political landscape in Poland?
So that is really a topic that I think gets overlooked in international media to a certain extent. We need to remember that 5 out of the 6 months during which Poland will be effectively leading the European Union will also overlap with the Polish domestic presidential campaign. Elections are due in May, and the outgoing president, Andrzej Duda, who was backed initially by Law and Justice, is still a right-wing populist, is a lame duck. He cannot run for re-election because he's already been serving 2 terms. He will definitely try to steal some of the spotlight. In fact, a few months before the change of government in the spring of 2023, the then government of Law and Justice changed the domestic bill on the Polish presidency, giving more extensive powers precisely to the office of the president. And so Duda will have some say in the priorities of the Polish presidency, and it already has a major impact, because one thing we can already say for certain is that a major summit was meant to take place in May between the new US administration, so Trump 2.0, and all the European leaders, scheduled to take place, in fact, here in Warsaw, because Poland will have the rotating presidency. We already know this is not going to happen, because if it did happen, it would have been Andrzej Duda to act as the official host, and Prime Minister Donald Tusk is very much unwilling to give him the spotlight right before the presidential election in Poland.
Because, of course, Tusk, the Prime Minister of Poland, has a long history with the EU. I wonder if you just remind us of his background and tell us what we might expect under Poland's tenure.
So I think this is very much the first time or first moment in the history of Polish membership in the European Union that Poland is actually staunchly in the mainstream of European politics. So Donald Tusk was also coincidentally the Prime Minister of Poland last time around when Poland had the presidency in 2011. So it's very much kind of a repetition of the playbook that we had over a decade ago, even though European politics is vastly different. The world has changed. We didn't have neither of the two invasions of Russian forces into Ukraine back then. So given the fact that Tusk was himself the president of the European Council twice, he was also the leader of the European People's Party, which is the largest European fraction in the European Parliament. He's very much well connected with the most important figures in European politics, namely Ursula von der Leyen, who's coming to Warsaw tomorrow for the official inauguration of the Polish presidency. We can safely assume that much of the priorities of Polish foreign and defense policy will overlap with the European priorities. So most importantly, I think more unity, perhaps a stronger hand against the renegades of European foreign policy. So Viktor Orban, Robert Fico in Slovakia as well, a more tougher stance rhetorically on them. And definitely in more tangible terms, finalizing the negotiations over the European defense industry program, so scaling up defense and being more resilient also in terms of hybrid threats from Russia.
Well, what about Trump? How will Tusk deal with him?
Well, this is very much an unknown, paraphrasing Donald Rumsfeld. We know that Donald Trump will try to be transactional, perhaps not with the entire European Union, because he's very much skeptical about any multilateral initiatives or opportunities to negotiate, but directly with Poland. Poland is really not much in a bad situation right now, given not just Tusk's experience, but also the persona of Radek Sikorski, the current head of the foreign ministry, very well versed in conservative circles in the United States, even taking into consideration that many of the key positions in the State Department under Trump will be probably filled by loyalists who have very little foreign policy experience. There is a lot of hope and a deeply rooted conviction, I would even say, that Sikorski will be able to talk sense to whoever will be on the other side of the negotiation table on behalf of the Americans.
Mateusz, thank you very much indeed. That's Mateusz Mazzini speaking to us from Warsaw. And you're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. H5N1 is otherwise known as bird flu, and there's a worrying uptick of the disease in the global avian population. And now the first severe case has been detected in a human living in Louisiana. California has issued a state of emergency over the growing number of human infections and concerns it could mutate further and begin transmitting between people. Well, joining us now is Dr. Chris Smith, who's host of the Naked Scientist podcast. He's a virologist at Cambridge University. Chris, it's great to have you back, although sadly every time you come on it's about some dreadful health scare. But thank you for being with us. How common is H5N1 in wild and domesticated birds?
Hello, Georgina, and Happy New Year to you and all our listeners. Well, the last few years have seen a huge surge in H5N1 cases in the bird population. It's ripped around the world and it has claimed the lives of literally billions of wild birds and has led to the destruction of millions of domesticated animals, because whenever we get outbreaks in birds that are being farmed, the way in which we control those outbreaks is with culling, and that's happened in many countries. So this is something that veterinarians, farmers and policymakers have been watching carefully for many years now. And the reason they're concerned is because the origin of flu that humans get is birds. They're the natural host of the virus, and periodically it jumps the species barrier, gets into us as a new form of flu, and that's how pandemics are born. And what we're seeing here in America now is that we saw the virus get from birds into a range of wild species, probably foxes and badgers, raccoons, that could then transmit the virus into domesticated mammals, cows. We then saw reports of cows transmitting the infection between themselves via their milk in milking parlours, and now we're seeing transmissions into humans with close contact with those cows. So we've moved from an infection that was a bird infection and staying firmly rooted in the bird world to something that made occasional forays into the mammalian world. Now it is thoroughly entrenched in the mammalian world and making forays into humans who have contact with those animals. That is why we're concerned that this could be the origin of the next pandemic.
So what is the effect of H5N1 or bird flu on humans?
Well, it's exactly the same as when we catch any flu infection. This virus binds to cells in the respiratory tract and causes variable amounts of damage to those cells. Different forms of the flu damage the airways to different extents. The reason we're concerned about H5 is that when this gets into us, because it doesn't normally circulate in humans, everybody on Earth is naive to it. We have no foundation of immunity against this agent, and therefore everyone is potentially susceptible. And if this did begin to spread highly efficiently among humans, it could cause devastating scales of outbreaks, and there are going to be people in the population who are more vulnerable than others, because everyone's vulnerable to flu, but there could be some who are more vulnerable to severe flu, and that could be COVID Mark II coming our way if we're not careful.
So how do we decrease the risk?
Well, number one is surveillance, and that's what the Americans are doing. You put in place various measures to make sure you know what this thing is doing, how it's changing for a start, because then you can work out what the real threat is. You then give people advice on how to minimize the risk of transmission from animals into people, because the worst case scenario is actually that a person with human flu also picks up this new bird flu, and then the flu does a sort of genetic pick and mix in the infected person, and you get a hybrid or baby virus formed, which blends the worst characteristics of both. The novelty of appearance of the bird virus and the ability to replicate and spread efficiently among humans of the human strain. So therefore encouraging people who have close contact with animals that might be infected to get vaccinated against human flu, also to take precautions with PPE, personal protective equipment, so that they don't expose themselves unnecessarily is also encouraging, and making sure that people are aware of these risks so that if they do pick up possible cases, the health authorities are immediately alerted, and then we can come in, do various measures that we know work very well to contain outbreaks so that it doesn't gain a toehold in the human population.
And are governments preparing?
Well, I think that they're aware that there might be a risk because we've been warning them, and the bird flu outbreak that has happened in the last few years has focused minds a bit off the back of what we were already all too familiar with COVID. Unfortunately, in this situation where we have multiple political distractions around the world, with wars going on, other people posturing politically and geopolitically, governments only have so much in the way of resources to spend on this sort of thing, and so it tends to slip down the priority order. And I fear, and I think that the WHO have kind of echoed this. Tedros Ghebreyesus, the Director General of the WHO, was saying that there have been learning points from COVID, and if COVID came back tomorrow, that we would be in a stronger position in some respects, but a worse position in others. So it's not a guarantee that we're ready for another pandemic, despite what we've just been through. It's 5 years since, of course, the first cases of COVID came along. So I think the answer is it's going to depend. Some countries are, again, going to be better prepared than others.
And Chris, does this feel like a disaster unfolding to you?
Well, it's something we must not be complacent about, because just because it hasn't taken off yet, we must be fearful. We must be cautious not to be seen to be obviously over-egging the pudding and causing alarm that's undue and unnecessary. But at the same time, we mustn't overlook that this has gone on for thousands of years, where these viruses jump the species barrier and cause outbreaks. We're better equipped now with the ability to track what they're doing and see the processes that lead to the emergence of new diseases. We are in a position now where we're beginning to see some of these things for the first time. So this is not like we're saying, oh yes, this is how it works. We're on a learning curve. Now, is this what happens when a pandemic begins? Is this the underlying machinery and we've just not been able to detect it and follow it like this before? Or is this just a new thing? this is why at the moment there are no certainties here, which is why we have to be careful and vigilant. And people are saying, look, we need to keep an eye on this. This could be this new strain of flu beginning to adapt in a way that will give it access to the world population, and we don't want that.
Dr. Chris Smith, thank you very much indeed. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Well, it's time now for a roundup of news from the Nordics, and for that we're joined by Monocle's Gunnar Grindid. Gunnar, Happy New Year to you. Welcome back home. I understand you got back late last night.
I did indeed, yeah. I've had a nice sort of white Christmas, as they say. It's been snowing lots in Norway. The family back there is getting bigger and bigger, and then back to work.
Back to work. And of course, the first thing we're looking at here is Norway's oil and gas industry is likely to continue rising. And that's because of the Russian gas pipeline to Europe that's been shut down in Ukraine.
That's right, yeah. So surprisingly, despite the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine, Ukraine has kept open and kept its agreement with Russia to keep open this gas pipeline into Europe to supply gas to the continent. But it has finally closed, which marks a huge milestone in Europe no longer being dependent on Russia for its energy. As you know, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, it caused a huge energy crisis, prices soaring. But this was very beneficial for Norway. You can actually, I wrote more about this in Monocle's latest Forecast 2025 issue. But Norway's oil and gas revenues spiked by more than 5 times more than it was in 2021 by the end of 2022. It has remained very high since. And since then, Europe, as it's been getting itself sort of more independent from Russia, this is just going to continue. Now that this pipeline is gone, it's going to set a new sort of milestone for European energy. It's going to be more reliant on Norway, on Russia, on the US and Qatar. So for Norway, this is very good news.
Let's go to Sweden now. And this is a blow for the ultra-low-cost Chinese retailers that pop up all over our phones all of the time.
Yeah, so I mean, these are definitely popular here in England as well, of course. But I can tell you in the Nordics, these ultra-low-cost retailers from China, such as Temu and Shein, they have become absolutely massive. All my friends are buying sort of Christmas gifts from them all the time. These are a lot of sort of fast fashion clothing, but also all kinds of different little trinkets and clothes and items that people buy from China, and they've grown massively. They've even taken a lot of the market away from Amazon, which are now trying to compete with their own version of this called Haul. But Sweden are now finally trying to do something about this. So the Climate and Environment Minister, Romina Pourmokhtari, she is calling for a ban on all products from these retailers. And the reason why she's the one getting involved in this as the Environment Minister is because of environmental concerns. So basically these companies, they use a lot of poisonous chemicals, illegal chemicals in their products. The processes, of course, don't have the same standards as European suppliers. The workplace environments and so on. So they're sort of citing all of these reasons to block them. So they're proposing a ban. Interestingly enough, in Norway, which of course has exactly the same problem, they're not really considering a ban. They're trying to encourage consumers to buy less of it. But that doesn't really seem to be happening. I mean, just in Sweden alone, 1 in 5 people, according to one survey, say that they were planning on buying all their Christmas gifts from these companies. So unless there's some sort of regulation to come in, to step in and do something about this, it's probably just going to keep going up and up.
Let's have a look at transport now. Now, here in the UK, the trains are just very well known not to be good. And on Christmas Day, they give up completely. There just is no public transport here. In Norway, you at least try and have public transport on Christmas Day, but this year wasn't to be.
This year, it absolutely failed. So on Christmas Day, all of Norway's trains, absolutely all of them, the entire network shut down for 12 hours due to a failure in the communication system by the government rail agency called Bane NOR. The failure affected over 60,000 people. This is around 4,200 kilometers of railway, 335 stations. And it led to losses of tens of millions of Norwegian kroner from the different companies that are supplying the train journeys. And they were completely unable to respond to this in time as well. That they did not have enough buses, they did not have enough cabs to get people to where they were going. So it was absolute chaos as people tried to get home or tried to go after Christmas Eve. Thankfully, in Norway, Christmas Eve is the big day. So hopefully most people got to where they were going that day. But it's a terrible end to this year for Bane NOR, the government agency, because this is something that Norwegians have been feeling for a long time. It's becoming a bit like the UK, where we used to find the railway system fairly reliable. It was sort of known, it's not German reliability, but it was reliable. It was usually on time. Things usually worked. We weren't afraid that we weren't going to get home. But this year, it's just gotten worse and worse, and now a new report's actually found that Bane NOR has on every single point, deliverable point that this report has looked at, Bane NOR has had its absolute worst year this year. So it's just getting worse and worse for public transport in Norway as well, I'm afraid.
I love the quote from the agency's CEO. He said, issues did not stem from incompetence.
Yes, exactly. He's been interviewed a lot, I mean, even before this as well, saying, is there a problem of competence in your agency? And he keeps saying, no, we have very competent people. It's got nothing to do with that. Despite that, because when this first happened, it seemed so extreme. The fact that they were so unprepared for this. People were afraid that this was a Russian cyber attack or something like that because it had to do with the communication system. And they had to come and say, no, this is all us, unfortunately. But we swear we're very competent.
Gunnar, thank you very much indeed. That's Monocle's Gunnar Grunlid. And that's all for this edition of The Briefing, which was produced by Chris Chermak. Our researcher was Gunnar Grunlid and our studio manager was Lily Austin. And The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Georgina Godwin. Goodbye and thanks for listening.